How should we pray? Prayer is a very important spiritual discipline. Sometimes in today's public life, we see prayer all over the public display in stages, in sports, in entertainment.
Not in schools, though.
Not in schools, that's
Not in
true.
schools.
But we sometimes get into arguments about public prayer. We get into large discussions about the value of prayer.
Well, Christ talked a lot about the value of prayer. And in fact, he answered your question on the Sermon on the Mount. He gave some specific instructions on how we should pray and why it's so important.
We thought we'd get into a series on the subject of prayer, and the best place to begin really is in Matthew chapter 6 and in verse 5, where Christ began to talk about prayer. It's sometimes called the Lord's Prayer or the model prayer. It's not just a prayer, it's really a pattern for prayer. And in verse 5, he says, "When you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward." So first Christ says, when you pray. Prayer for him and for his followers, he meant for his disciples to be a praying people.
He didn't say if.
No, he said when.
He said we're supposed to be doing that. And he said it's not a public thing that we want to pat on the back because we look like we're religious. There's something much deeper than that about it.
And really what his emphasis was on here was the hypocrisy of those who do pray in public to be seen of men as if that was a measure of and standard for their righteousness. Mm-hmm. He knew that it wasn't.
And it wasn't at all. And not by God's standard anyway. By people's standards, they can get confused. But it's God's standards and having a relationship with him and talking with him.
And of course he said they have their reward. You want to be careful that prayer is not something that we do for anyone else. Our prayers are to God, and they are for the relationship that we want to build with God. There's a lot to say about this particular subject, and verse 5 just really begins it. We'll pick it up at another point, but prayer is something that all of us should be focusing on if you want to build what we call a relationship with God.
We'll talk more about that in our next BT Daily. We'll see you next time.